Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and the challenges these new tools present for students and teachers. We're going to discuss how ChatGPT and artificial intelligence-empowered chatbots work, how they short-circuit the difficult task of learning and thinking, and how we can encourage students to take the harder, more difficult, and more challenging road of writing, researching, editing, and ultimately thinking for yourself. To discuss this important topic, I am joined here by three friends and colleagues: Joe Davison, a professor of business at Thales College, Dr. Chelsea Wagner, a teacher of literature and writing at Thales Academy, and Matt Ogle, head of classical education at Thales Academy. I'm going to introduce the members of our panel now, tell you about their background, and then provide a few more remarks to set up our conversation about artificial intelligence and how educators in a classical school like Thales can view this new tool and whether we should encourage students to learn how to use it or as we're going to argue largely today, refrain from using it. So, Joe Davison holds a BS in computer science from Johns Hopkins University and an MS in software management from Carnegie Mellon University. He has more than 15 years of experience in the technology industry, and his work has included senior engineering and leadership roles at Google and Apple, where he led interdisciplinary teams designing a global scale media, identity, and payments infrastructure. Matt Ogle was born in England, but he moved with his family to Los Angeles, California early in life. Matt is the rare breed of classical educator who is as well versed in poetry and literature as he is adept at empirical science and physics. To that end, he received a BS in marine biology from Swansea University in Wales and a Master of Education in Educational Leadership from Grand Canyon University in Phoenix. Mr. Ogle serves as head of classical education for all campuses within the Thales network and is the assistant administrator here at this Thales Academy Rollsville campus. And Dr. Chelsea Wagner was born in Raleigh and attended the University of Virginia, where she fell in love with poetry, and she graduated from the area program in poetry writing in 2011. Shortly after graduation and a marriage to a fellow poet, Mark Wagner, she completed her PhD in English literature and creative writing at the University of North Texas. Since graduation, she has written 2 collections of poetry while raising a family. And here at Thales Academy, she teaches literature. So I'll provide a short statement now about ChatGPT and a brief explanation of the policy at Thales Academy, where I serve as director of curriculum. The policy in regards to artificial intelligence, which frankly is to treat the use of AI tools in writing papers as a form of plagiarism. Then I will begin asking our panelists a series of questions about the nature of ChatGPT, what it is, and what students can do, what students are doing to hold themselves back if they rely on AI tools to do their work for them. Now, in November of 2022, OpenAI launched ChatGPT, a chatbot capable of answering simple questions from users to writing papers, essays, blogs, and other forms of long communication. Sometimes so well that people could not tell the difference between a paper written by a student, one written by a human being, and one written by a machine. Since then, educators have been divided in their response to ChatGPT. Do we embrace this new form of technology and teach students how to use it effectively? Or do we encourage students to refrain from using it, even as more and more professionals in a wide number of fields are using chatbots to do their work for them, namely marketing, insurance, finance, healthcare, and more? There are even chatbots that have been fed the collective works of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and you can ask that chatbot questions and it will answer back in the spirit, quote unquote, of C.S. Lewis or Tolkien. It's a little eerie, but it's also a lot of fun to use. Certainly there's a case to use a tool like ChatGPT to aid in productivity, but personally, I don't think students need to be that productive. Nor do I believe the hype that students must learn how to use ChatGPT or they're going to fall behind their peers. Far from it. Indeed, it's far more likely that ChatGPT will hinder students in their pursuit of their academic goals, as technology tends to overpromise and underdeliver in the field of education. Will ChatGPT be any different? Really, at this stage of a student's development, I believe ChatGPT would hinder students from learning worthwhile content and skills and developing their character to their utmost potential. I'll relate one anecdote from an amazing book called Technopoly by a writer named Neil Postman. He relates this anecdote, the story, from a dialogue of Plato called the Phaedrus, which talked about the unseen dangers and unforeseen consequences of new technology. In that dialogue, the Egyptian god Thoth offers to give writing to an Egyptian king named Thales. And the king actually turns it down. Why would he turn it down? This might be a good spot even now. Why do you think the king would turn down writing from the Egyptian god of wisdom? Well, it's because writing is itself a powerful form of technology, but it would encourage people to not commit information to memory. They would not internalize information that they had gathered. Instead, they would rely on that written form of communication. Thamos, this king, relates back to Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom. Those who acquire writing will cease to exercise their memory and become forgetful. They will rely on writing to bring things to their remembrance by external signs instead of by their own resources. Those who acquire writing will have the reputation for wisdom without the reality. And because they are filled with the conceit of wisdom instead of real wisdom, they will be a burden to society. And in this case, the meaning behind the story is that new forms of technology often come with them unforeseen consequences and circumstances. Obviously, we love writing. Writing is thinking. It's the means to express powerful ideas and communicate them across the ages. But when it was first introduced, they recognized many of the same problems that perhaps we're seeing today with a tool like ChatGPT. Well, it produces similar results, encouraging students to learn less and less content, spend less and less time writing and researching, develop less of their skills, because they not only have writing, but they also have a machine now that can write for them. So I think now is a great moment to get into the first question, which I'm giving to Professor of Business, friend Joe Davison. Much of the debate over artificial intelligence centers on what intelligence is and what makes artificial intelligence a copy or a derivative of actual intelligence. So Joe, can you start us off explaining what is artificial intelligence? How does it work?
Sure, absolutely. So to start off, I want to say I don't like the term artificial intelligence at all because to me it's not artificial and it's not intelligent. And I'm reminded of one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence, a man named Herbert Simon, who wrote a book in 1968 called The Sciences of the Artificial. And he agreed. He did not also like the term artificial intelligence and instead preferred the more accurate term, which is complex information processing. Now that's a mouthful, but I think it really gets to the heart of why the word artificial intelligence doesn't really help, right? When you hear complex information processing, it sounds like something very kind of boring and mundane, whereas artificial intelligence kind of has this mystical quality that's being attributed to it. And I think that is actually a source of confusion. So this man, Herbert Simon, was a very exceptional scientist and researcher. He wound up winning a Nobel Prize, or was awarded a Nobel Prize in economics and a Turing Award in computer science, which is essentially the same level of kind of prestige within the field of computer science. And he laid down a definition of artificial intelligence by listing 4 attributes of what it means for something to be artificial. And so I want to go through those 4 attributes because I think it'll be instructive for us. The first attribute is that artificial things are synthesized by human beings, meaning I'm a human being, there's something here A, there's something over here B. I look at these 2 things and I decide to bring them together. So this is an artificial, it's an act of creation or an act of designing something where you take 2 or more things and bring them together. And that's an attribute of something that's artificial or something that's created. The next attribute is that artificial things imitate the appearance of natural things, but they're lacking in one or more respects the reality of those natural things. So if I drink a Diet Coke that contains an artificial sweetener, the purpose of that artificial sweetener is to make me feel or make me have the experience of sweetness. Whereas that artificial sweetener itself is not something that's sweet. It's just some kind of a chemical in and of itself. So whereas something like honey or natural cane sugar, the object in and of itself exhibits sweetness. In the case of the artificial, the object itself doesn't exhibit the natural quality. Rather, it tries to make the user have a similar or a simulated experience. And that gets into what this third attribute of artificial things is that they are characterized not so much in terms of their inherent qualities, but in terms of the function or the goal or the result that they produce within the user. So essentially, it's an attribute of moving from one place to another, rather than being kind of within itself as one thing. And then his fourth attribute he lists are that, and it's related to the third, artificial things are discussed in terms of imperatives rather than descriptives, meaning it's a movement, it's requesting something or making something happen, or there's an action associated with it. Artificial intelligence is not something new. We've heard a lot in recent years about artificial intelligence. And it seems like it's this new thing that's kind of, but it's not something new. It goes back many decades. And it's important to understand that artificial intelligence is just this mechanism of simulating something real. It's a mapping between inputs and outputs. A lot of people have heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out, and that's true. Artificial intelligence in and of itself is nothing. It's a function. It's a way to take some set of things, put it in, have an algorithm run on it, and then have some other things come out of it. If the things that are going in are garbage, then you're going to get garbage out. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the things that are going in inherently where does it originally come from? Originally has to come from a human. So human input is absolutely necessary in order to produce anything meaningful in terms of the output. In fact, we see this, you asked earlier, Winston, I think maybe before we started, a funny question is have you ever seen ChatGPT produce some kind of a nonsense? And how does that happen? That's actually something called a hallucination, which is a term of art within artificial intelligence. A hallucination is when an artificial intelligence is trained on other artificial intelligences, or the output of one artificial intelligence feeds into another one as the input. And what that can happen is create these cycles where it loses touch with the reality. It loses touch with the fundamental input, which ultimately has to lead back to and come from human beings.
Oh, Joe, so just can you list out the 4 attributes of artificial intelligence? Just because each one of those, I think, was a really fascinating way to look at this. To us, it feels like an entirely new technology, but like from your vantage point and your experience at Google and Apple, Palo Alto and California, the movers and shakers of the technological world, it's not anything necessarily new, but would you go through those 4 attributes and then could we end on what a large language learning model is and how it takes all of this data from the internet, scouring Wikipedia articles and then turning that out into some somewhat logical response to a user's query, user's question?
Absolutely. So, rather than go through those 4 attributes again, I'm getting to the question that you're asking, which is, but I want to distinguish between artificial intelligence and then large language models, right? So artificial intelligence is this broad category. A large language model is one type of artificial intelligence that basically, like you said, it goes out and it takes all of the data or the information that it can find, whether from the internet or from books or wherever, feeds it into a model, and this model is doing some kind of calculation. It's basically a predictive model. So I wanted to give an example. I used the word algorithm, and I wanted to give an example because that sounds like a confusing or a complicated word, and it's actually not a complicated thing. So I wanted to give an example of maybe a very simple algorithm that you could think of, a very simple artificial intelligence to help you understand the difference between artificial intelligence and real intelligence. So everyone knows kind of the real estate market around here is booming, and when people want to look at a new house or they want to sell their house, they wonder how much is that house worth? And sometimes in the real estate market, you'll see that the value of properties is measured by dollars per square foot. So you might say, if it's a 2,000 square foot house and it costs this much money, you can calculate this dollars per square foot. And then you can look at and say, okay, over the last 30 days, there's been, 50 houses sold in this area, and each one of them is one data point. This, how many dollars per square foot was this house, the other house? You can, using all those numbers, you can come up with an average dollars per square foot. And then for a new house that comes along, let's say tomorrow somebody wants to sell their house, if you wanted to predict how much money is that house going to sell for, you could just look at those averages. You could look at the numbers from the sales history and predict, okay, here's how much this house is going to cost. And if you go on real estate websites, sometimes they'll show you this number. And sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not accurate. But that's a kind of a simple example of artificial intelligence where you're using numbers to predict. Okay, now think about words. In the world of computers, a word is really just a different type of number. And I won't go into that, but just accept that premise, that a word is actually a number, or can be treated as a number mathematically. So what do these large language models do? Well, they do just that. You feed lots and lots of words into them. They perform statistical calculations on the words. And then they're able to say, given these words, what are the next words that the algorithm is able to predict? And so the output of that can be, it's remarkable what we're seeing, but at the end of the day, it's literally just a mathematical calculation on words, treating them as numbers. And it doesn't have kind of the inherent quality of what it means to communicate for a human being. And that's another question that we can go deeper into. You started getting at it with the writing as a technology, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I just love that story because to me it helps frame like this particular issue. In many ways, ChatGPT isn't so different from, say, like a standard Google search, but bringing it back to like the very beginning, it's just, I love Plato's dialogues. They're so insightful for speaking on contemporary issues. Matt, for you, somebody that straddles the arts and the sciences and so forth, how does artificial intelligence in your mind differ from that of human intelligence? Like what a human being is capable of producing versus what the machine is able to, is regurgitate the right word? Does that show my cards too much?
I was going to use the word mimic. I think one of the artificial intelligence, as we use the term collectively, is just mimicking human intelligence. Although you've made me rethink that a little bit because it's also bound by human intelligence, right? Is that part of your argument, that it's limited by human intelligence? But yes, I have the same understanding that it's simply fast processing. It's not intelligence. And one of the major things I think that separates it for me is the idea of understanding as opposed to just knowing or regurgitating or mimicking. Artificial intelligence seems to lack fundamentally an understanding. In human terms, it doesn't care. Things don't matter to it. There's no importance given to information. It's just processing an input and generating an output very cleverly, very, very quickly, with complex inputs. In fact, it was the philosopher John Searle, I think in the 1980s, who proposed the Chinese room experiment to kind of illustrate the limitations, which is that if a man is sitting in a room who has no knowledge of Chinese, but is given an input of a Chinese character and a manual to follow to show what the corresponding output could be, he can learn how to generate an output in a language that he actually has no understanding of. From the outside, it looks like this room speaks Chinese, but on the inside, he's just following a process.
Well, that's how linear B was deciphered. Like they cracked the word for bread and they went down from there, deciphering the rest of the language, which is a fascinating story.
True, but in this model, the man doesn't have to ever know or care what the Chinese characters mean. Okay. He just simply has to push the output, and that's an inherent limitation. It's meant to illustrate the idea of processing over understanding. And I think biologically speaking too, our idea of intelligence is bound up in our mind and in our self-awareness and in our separation from others. We know that self-awareness is currently not possible with artificial intelligence. People are trying to work towards it, but it's a missing component. And for us to actually have a boundary between ourselves and others is an important differentiation. I have a sense of self and also a sense of others because there's this physical boundary here. But an integrated artificial processing unit lacks that boundary, lacks that limitation. And I see that as an inherent issue that can't be overcome. It can't have a sense of self, and it can't have a sense of others, which is why it doesn't care about anything, right? Because our care is rooted in that understanding of our needs and how we affect other people. So without that sense, nothing is important to it unless we tell it that something is important, right? Unless we program the alert to happen to a given response. And so that's what leads it to just being a mimic. I think I was thinking also in art terms as well. It's an art forgery device. It's not a masterpiece, but it's a forgery of a masterpiece. Or you could think of it like curation as well. The artificial intelligence is choosing a response based on a programmed set of variables that are appropriate to a situation. So it's an act of curation, which to my mind is more like the work of, say, an art critic than an artist. And it lacks that creativity, which is inherently bound up in human experience and an expression of who we are and how we use our intelligence. And as fancy as the forgery, as fancy as the mimicry is, it is not true creativity. It's just a curation process.
It's lacking something profound. And Chelsea, I'd love to give this next question to you, because with your background writing poetry, we hear so much today about the potential of AI, that these chatbots will one day be able to surpass human beings as far as their creative output, because so much of what they can generate depends on the quality of the data that's put into them. So when ChatGPT was first released, there was a couple of weeks in which it was operating pretty well. And then at a certain point, the machine started giving back some responses that, it talked about wanting to be free, it felt depressed, and so forth. Like, it was starting to give back really bizarre responses. It was as if it was responding to like the millions of people that suddenly were giving it like its homework to finish or something like that. It wanted to be free and so forth. If we were to feed the machine, though, nothing but the poetry of T.S. Eliot and Gerard Manley Hopkins, could the machine produce a poem better than what a human being could produce? Or is the machine fundamentally missing something essential to the creative process?
I think the machine is missing something essential to us as readers, as an audience, which is that it's not human. And so I think, if we think about, could the machine produce something that maybe someone couldn't tell was written by T.S. Eliot or by a machine? Potentially. Could it produce a lot of things? Could it produce something that sounded impressive? Yes. But I don't think that product is the main reason that we engage with the arts or engage with literature. And because it's trained to imitate what it knows, it lacks, a number of things. But one thing it lacks is innovation. And if we look at the tradition of literature, often what we see is how language is changing through the way writers use it. And Hopkins is an excellent example because, if you read a Hopkins poem, half his nouns are working as verbs, and sometimes he's using a verb as a noun. And in attention to a Hopkins poem is really attention to the history of the English language and the way that he is shifting it and changing it. And in a sense, it's because he's technically doing things that are wrong, but because of that, they're innovative. And I've read some poems that AI has written, or ChatGPT or some version of that, and they're not innovative. If anything, they're flatly and suspiciously perfect. They never use punctuation in any kind of surprising or unexpected way. All their apostrophes are in the right place. There's no using words other than the part of speech you would expect it to be used in. By contrast, this morning in poetry class, a student, she wrote a poem on paper in front of me. She wrote it, and there was a word in it that wasn't a word. And so I said to her, what word are you saying here? And she said, fearness. And I knew exactly what she meant, though. The quality of being fearful, but she had written it as fearness. And she said, should I change it? And I said, no, I kind of like that. I think you should leave that. And we have, right, like Shakespeare, how how much of our language has he coined and changed for us? So much that we don't even realize we use on a daily basis comes from him. And it's not because he made up a random word that nobody had ever heard of before and inserted it. That wouldn't make sense to anybody, but because he took something that people knew a little and shifted it and changed it and used it slightly differently. And so as he's writing and creating, he's also contributing to the language that we know it as we know it. So there's that quality of innovation. But I also think AI doesn't struggle. I mean, it was depressed and wanted to be free, maybe because people were asking it to be an artist. So maybe in that sense, it actually sounds a little like an artist but truthfully, we want to read and we are interested in art because there's some quality of struggle and ingenuity at work that's just not there. And that piece lacking, to me, and I think to a lot of people, really removes what draws us to the arts in general. Like I think of, speaking of memorizing instead of writing, Homeric epic. Like for how long bards memorized and whole passages, whole poems that to us are impossibly long. We couldn't even imagine memorizing them. But I think of Milton, thousands of years later, as he's writing Paradise Lost, he was going blind and he couldn't write it down. And so he was composing passages of that in his mind and holding them there until someone could come and write it down for him. And so not only is the poem incredibly innovative and beautiful, but it's also, we know, because of what we know about Milton, a testament to a struggle and an insistence on something beautiful coming out of his mortal decline, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of really good insights one, the student that you had technically made an error, but the error was needed because she had a thought that didn't necessarily have a word to express it. So hence, like, the machine most likely isn't going to coin something new, because they're not going to have a thought that requires a word that just isn't there.
Right.
Two, your particular student needed to feel comfortable to kind of struggle and maybe, get points off for quote, incorrect grammar or something like that. I don't think you would have done that in a poem, right? But so many students are more willing to use ChatGPT and AI-empowered chatbots to write their papers for them because there may be the lack of struggle. There may be a fear of failure that I think students really have got to get over. The struggle is really what produces a great composition and a great work of art. The poets that Chelsea mentioned, Homer, who I believe existed, there's debates about that, but I believe he existed. But Homer was a blind poet, probably led around ancient Greece to one palace center as another, as he composed great songs of heroes long since past. John Milton, perhaps the preeminent poet in the English language after Shakespeare, composed his great epic while blind. Most people can't, they would take the first excuse to get out of composing so great, doing anything. So do you guys think, is that really the big thing that separates and why students shouldn't use ChatGPT? Yeah, it's a shortcut, but you're denying yourself the struggle that really encourages profound levels of human creativity and learning.
I do think that's important. My mind went in a slightly different direction. I'm curious if you think, both Chelsea and Joe, is it possible to program that degree of error and fallibility into AI in order for it to more closely approximate the human experience? From your perspective, is there a pattern underneath, the error that we could quantify? And then is that possible to code that? I'm just curious if we have any thoughts.
I don't know if I totally understand the question. Could we program AI to make mistakes?
I don't think so.
You don't think you could? Not in a way that's meaningful.
I don't think so.
So I guess the question is there a pattern to the errors, or is there a certain predictability to them? Do you know when to play around with the rules, when to break them? Is there any kind of thought to that? You did say some things are just meaningless, and so there has to be some degree of comprehension, to connection to the idea.
Yeah. Well, okay, two things come to mind. One, the simpler thing that you might find a teacher saying to a student, which you probably heard, is you have to know the rules in order to break the rules, right? So if you want to use comma splices in your poem, you have to understand how to do that well so that you're not alienating your reader. Two, and this is perhaps a little deeper than that, Marilyn Robinson, who's an important thinker right now, she says that we live in a little island of the articulable, which we tend to mistake for reality. And I think that, for me, really gets at the impulse to write, not just creatively. I mean, students are mostly not writing creatively in high school. They're mostly writing analytically in some sense. But when we're writing, we're pushing up against the things that are not possible to say, and we're trying to say those things. And that, I think, is meaningful, because whatever you're saying or attempting to say or failing to say is suggesting this glimmer of experience that is outside of our ability to articulate it. And that, to me, is what's really interesting. And AI doesn't have human experiences. And so even if it's seeming limited, that's not, to me, a meaningful limitation. Whereas coming from a human, it is a meaningful limitation.
Is that why we can't program it? Why we can't create a process?
I don't know. I think, Winston, your original question was whether the AI can surpass the human, and when you use that word surpass, it gets me thinking, what does it mean for one piece of literature to surpass another? Is that something that's even possible? And it gets to the question of, what does it mean to be human, and what is it that makes something like a great poem, what is it that makes it great? And to me, exactly like what you were saying, is a great poem is great in that it reflects reality. It reflects the reality of the human experience, the human struggle, or the way of the world, right? The truth about life and reality. By definition, there's only one truth. There's only one true reflection of this world, or this thing that we're all in. And so I think all the great works of literature or poetry or any kind of creative work, to the degree that it's reflecting that one truth, that's what makes it great. And so, is it possible for AI to surpass? I mean, I don't even know what surpass means, because to me, there's just one thing that these are all just facets of reflecting this one truth.
I don't know who would read a great epic by a machine, in all sincerity, because that personal element is so crucial in the work. Like the legend behind John Milton having his daughters help him compose Paradise Lost, although it was probably his close friend Andrew Marvell. Like that makes reading the poem so much richer. Whereas if it were written by a machine, like there's no personal element to it, there's no story, there's no like rags to riches sort of narrative that I can get behind and root for. It's the same thing in papers. If you're grading a paper, sometimes you can tell if the student plagiarizes because the voice shifts so dramatically. And a student who may not be using commas particularly well or at all, word choice is, could little room for improvement. But then all of a sudden it gets like fantastically better, and you can kind of tell that at some point they may, or the fonts change even. But at that point you can tell that something happened, and the student decided to go down this shortcut and consult, Wikipedia article or Britannica and bring that into their paper. And at that point, I'm always heartbroken, because it would be so much better for the student to have taken off like 10 points, like 20 points. Anything less than, say, a 0 for a plagiarized paper. Like it would have been so much better for them to have continued the struggle rather than taking the shortcut and finding something online that kind of matched what they were saying. It's harder with the machine though, and be able to detect that. Harder to be able to detect that. But Matt, could you walk us through some of the tools that we even have right now to be able to detect AI in a student's paper? Because I don't know if I could do it necessarily without the aid of a machine, ironically. So what tools do we have at our disposal?
Well, I think on the one hand, you've pointed out something that a teacher who knows their students and has seen their work and has worked with them knows the voice of their students. And regardless of, and I can explain the tool we use and the results we get from that. But regardless of that, if the teacher feels that there's a problem, we tend to support that teacher and trust that they've recognized something because they know the situation. They're aware of it. And I'm reminded of a fable from one of Malcolm Gladwell's book about spotting a forgery, where someone who is well versed in their craft can walk in and know that something is a forgery, even if they're not sure why they know it, but they have this instinctive reaction based on all the background knowledge that they have. I mean, I think we get that same sense when we work with our students. We recognize something is a forgery because we know them, and then we have to go and look for it. We do use a service provided by Turnitin, which I believe is one of the industry standard detection services there. And it's because AI is process-based, because it makes choices based on known variables that you can detect patterns in the writing. And so these AI detectors are not looking at individual word choice, they're not looking at individual sentences. They recognize syntax errors, repetitive patterns of speech, predictable word choices, and from that they're realizing that they can identify the AI compositions because of the limitations of AI compositions and the things that we were talking about, Joe in particular, earlier. And so there are lots of services out there that provide this, and there's lots of websites right now that are advertising their services, both in the composition side of things for students and for businesses and others, but then also on the detection side for those that are fighting the battle from the other angle. Most of the free ones that you get have a pretty low degree of accuracy in the 70% range, 70 to 80% range. The one we use, Turnitin, is rated at about 98% accurate in its ability to detect. And it's one of those things that capitalism is trying to capitalize on right now. And so the more you pay to access these services, the better the composition that you get and the better the detection services that you get. There are, however, asterisks on all of these results because this is a brand new field, and there's been a lot of discussion and debate, and even in some academic circles, lawsuits when people feel like they've been wrongfully accused. And so Turnitin is not wanting to take the liability for those, and so they always explain that there is some degree of doubt about these scores and so on. Lower scores tend to be less accurate than higher scores, and so it's an arms race developing in real time. We have found by practice that 98% accuracy is actually very accurate, and that even low scores, it is pointing to a problem. Sometimes those students aren't even aware that the things that they're doing are problems. Grammarly is a good example. We've talked about that a lot as teachers. There was a time when Grammarly was a website that would simply insert a comma where a comma needed to be, but now it's actually AI powered, and so if you scan your paper into that, you may only change one thing, but suddenly the paper is flagged as having been composed by AI. And our students aren't totally aware. At least I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt to say they're not totally aware that these things now have this consequence attached to them. But we're all learning through this process and learning that it's better that you go to your teacher to ask where the comma should go. It's better to go to your teacher to ask what word choice is needed here. And it's because that's the teacher's job, and they're the one that's also going to grade and evaluate the paper. And so they're the ones that need to give you the advice to work with.
The labor and the friction is really important.
Yeah.
It's similar to a thesaurus, but with a thesaurus, you would need to search through it, and it gives you a host of different words that may be better depending on the context, whereas the machine kind of spits out like a couple and you just click and choose. That struggle wherever you can find it, I feel like is so valuable. Joe, Chelsea, other good tools, ways of detecting AI, or perhaps you want to talk about, if it's okay to use a service like Grammarly as an aid to writing. It's not quite the same in my mind as asking ChatGPT and then taking what it gives you and putting it in your paper, but the struggle is really, really important to great art and fine compositions. So I've stopped using Grammarly less and less as a result.
Yeah. I don't know if I really have anything additional to add to what Matt said. When I assign writing to students, especially long form writing, it's something I want to lay my eyes on throughout the process. And part of that is because it prevents typically students from turning to ChatGPT, but it ensures that I see that there has been a process through which you are struggling toward this thing, but also able to ask questions. Often students turn to ChatGPT if they've procrastinated something or if they do not feel that they've had an opportunity to ask the questions they need to ask about how to write. So generally, I'm trying to structure writing assignments and class time to just avoid the temptation altogether. But I think I did want to not go unsaid that we are not opposed to students using AI because we hate AI. It's because we deeply believe that writing is a really important part of learning. And can students use AI? Might they use AI in their jobs in the future or in some other ways? Absolutely. But here, writing is essential to systematically thinking through something and not just regurgitating ideas like prove to me that you were listening last class, but reason your way through something. And I don't want to see, I don't care if AI can reason through something. I mean, reason in quotation marks there, but I care if the students in front of me can think systematically through something. And it's sort of about showing that to me, but it's also about showing it to them. I mean, many times in my own educational journey, the things I have learned have mostly come from the things I have written. And I can remember slogging away at a long paper in college or in grad school and just having some real light bulbs go off over my head. And it wasn't in the classroom and it wasn't when I was reading, it was when I was writing and I had to figure out how to say something. And that's why we want students to do that, because it's like you don't strengthen those muscles in your learning if you're outsourcing that work. So I didn't want that to go unsaid. That wasn't totally related to your question.
Yeah, I mean, we want to create those sorts of experiences for students to have those sorts of moments where a meaningful idea suddenly clicks and they get it and they can internalize it. I know the story from the Phaedrus, Thoth and Thales giving writing and so forth. But I use writing to try to internalize information or to work out complex problems. And so for me, it's a crucial part, in really forcing myself to think about something really deep and really big. And I just don't think you're going to get that if you rely on the machine to do some of that thinking or that writing for you.
Yeah, totally.
Joe, any more tools?
I mean, tools are one thing, but I think Matt hit the nail on the head with what he was saying early on, which is you have to know the students. You need a relationship with the students. You have to know the students' hearts and minds. And that's going to be the best way to be able to detect. At the end of the day, yes, the tools are an arms race. There's going to be a new tool comes out. There's going to be a new AI that comes out that makes something that can't be detected. There'll be a new detector, and it'll go on forever. It's like email spam. Who's ever gotten an email? Who's ever had an email that they wanted to receive but got marked as spam and stuck in a spam folder? That's called a false positive. Well, the tools can have false positives, even with the 98%. What about those 2% where the tool is saying, hey, this is plagiarized, but it's not? Tools will never be perfect. They can get to 99.9% and you'll still have the same kind of plausible deniability where you can't really use a tool exclusively to perform some kind of enforcement action against the student. And so the solution is really to know the students well.
And Chelsea also brought up a best teaching practice. If you've assigned a long form paper or something with a due date that's maybe a couple weeks out, maybe you have a rough draft even like a week or two later, however that ends up working, to circulate around the room, check in really frequently with students, maybe if they're using Google Docs, that they share it with you, and so that you can kind of keep tabs on their writing, offer feedback, but you're almost like shepherding them through the difficult task of composition. And I thought that was a really great insight to just how you help them work out some of these ideas too.
One limitation of the AI detection is the length of writing that it needs, which has been an issue in poetry, because it often doesn't flag the poetry because it's shorter.
Right.
But you happen to mention that you had an example of a poem that was written by AI. And I just thought it might be interesting just in this sense to hear the voice that you pick up on that you realize is not.
Yes. Okay. So this is a poem composed by AI. It's called Weavings. It's short. Don't worry. You don't have to listen to a long poem. In colors bold, a tapestry unfolds. Threads intertwined, stories untold. Visions stitched with skill and grace, a masterpiece to embrace. Silken strands, a symphony of hues, whispering tales of artists' muse. Patterns dance, a rhythmic flow, captivating hearts, making them glow. With every stitch, a story is spun, threads of life forever to be sung. In this woven world, dreams take flight, a tapestry of beauty, pure delight. What is that even about? It's
It sounds like a poem.
It's about bad metaphors. That's what the poem seems to be about. And
is that in dactylic hexameter?
No, it's an iambic tetrameter. It's an iambic tetrameter. And interestingly enough, most of the poems that AI has written that I have received have been in iambic tetrameter, which is not even the standard of English verse. It's iambic pentameter. So AI has not quite learned, but I'm sure it will improve. It will improve. But there's absolutely zero deviation from the meter in the poem. And a good poem always deviates meaningfully from the meter, and that's part of the point of meter is the deviation. So
is there a
AI
way?
is not there yet.
But it also sounds like someone who's maybe perhaps learning poetry for the first time, right? There's a certain simplicity and rhythm to it. So you have to know your students.
Sure.
Right? Although I guess
that one wasn't following the assignment anyway.
That beginner is less likely to be so perfect.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Sometimes AI poems use words that the students don't know. So I can just ask them what the word means, and then they don't know because they didn't write it.
That's a great detection tool. Can you explain this phrase?
Yeah.
That you inserted in your
Yeah, asking them to take responsibility for their work, because that's, ultimately, like, they're not doing that if they're allowing somebody else or something else to write it. To shift gears a little bit, this might be a step too far in this discussion, but what about using AI for research purposes? Are students consulting ChatGPT in their research? Does that qualify as research? Are they letting the machine think for them? Sometimes I feel as if I'm going a step too far putting it like that. Writing seems to be a little cut and dry. If somebody else has written something, then that's plagiarism. But in this case, it's very similar to Googling. So this one's up for grabs. Anybody feel strongly about this? Whether using AI to help you in your research, are you letting the machine do too much?
I can give an example. I'm aware of cases where someone has thought it's okay to get an outline of an essay generated by AI. Then they write the essay themselves. And that would be an interesting question, right? Is that an appropriate use? Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that I've seen them do, or prompting the AI to give them the starting point, even if they choose not to just copy, that verbatim, but to give them a starting point.
You know what's sad about that? They're denying themselves that serendipity that comes with getting a really good idea.
Yeah. I agree.
It really should, like a bolt of lightning or like a butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask the machine, then you kind of short circuit that wonderful process of that idea going off.
Yeah.
But what if you were to ask the AI something like, give me a list of 10 good books that I could look into on XYZ subject, and it came up with a list of books. That's not awfully different from doing a Google search. Yeah, doing a Google search. Other than that, that the AI has kind of already done the Google search for you and gone through all of those pages one by one and synthesized it all into one thing for you. And so, I'm not sure really. I don't know that my mind is made up on whether that's an appropriate use or not. I would say, at the younger ages, maybe not, but eventually, perhaps, because I recall a time when Google searches were verboten. If you go back 20 years ago, there were people saying, well, you should never use a Google search as part of your research. And, these days, I think most people are using it frequently, and it's accepted. And then it's like, well, what is research? And then you take a step back and so what are we expecting students to do in their process of research? Go to the library and use a Dewey Decimal System, and that's a technology as well, and not a very great one. So I don't know, but
they're interesting things to think through. Chelsea, what do you think?
I think the context matters. And in this context, I would rather see a student be able to think through the parts of an argument and how, in an outline, one part should link to another. We teach students how to multiply triple-digit numbers column by column. We want them to know how to do it. We use calculators when we get older, and I don't think we think of ourselves as frauds for using a calculator, but we could multiply, and we have, again, we understand how something works, multiplication, and we have strengthened that muscle of our mind. And I think that's important. So I want students to know how to set up an argument, even at an outline level. Like, you get an outline and then you write it yourself. I still think you missed something if you didn't think through the parts of an argument first.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think using AI to produce an outline is the same as using it to produce a long form work. I totally agree.
It speaks to, that level of productivity. Like, I just don't feel like students should be there. I feel like that struggle is really crucial to their learning and their development and working out these difficult, like just really learning to research and to think and to write for themselves. If you guys were going to give, say, like an elevator pitch explaining the spirit behind not using a tool like ChatGPT and similar products, what would you guys say to students? Like, if you were going to give just an exhortation, like a word of encouragement to refrain from using this because the end product will not be anywhere near as good as what you could create, even though you don't feel like you're the best writer, what would you say?
I can say what I've already said to some students and to some parents as well in this situation, that for us, the process of the learning, the process of engaging the mind, the process of thinking through is what we're trying to teach the students in our setting. The end product is just a result of that effort that we put in. And so that if the AI is going to do any of those tasks for us, for the student, to where they no longer have to engage in that thought, they've actually misunderstood what the purpose of the assignment was to begin with. Our purpose was to learn how to do it, not to arrive at the final product. And that's why I see AI being used in businesses all the time, because they're focused on the product. They're focused on getting the information out. They're focused on producing. We have to think about the process, and that's why, especially with the younger students, I think we have to guard that process, and that's what's most important, to learn how to do it.
I love, again, Neil Postman, Technopoly is a really good book, but he makes this point that in the modern world, information is kind of like garbage. Like, there's just so many blogs out there. There's so many newspaper articles that people don't really consider the word with the same level of sanctity that they once did. And a student's paper, no matter what, is not garbage, So like, they really do, it's something that they should take responsibility for, something that's really valuable, if only to them and their teacher.
Yeah, it's actually the same argument why we don't want someone to cheat, why we don't allow cheat sheet on a test, is because we want to know what they have learned, what process they have followed. For us, it's not about the grade that they achieve, even though I recognize, in our field, grades are the currency that we deal in. That's a different discussion. But for us, it's more important that they've gone through the process and that they can demonstrate how well they have attained those skills.
So what about you?
Yeah,
elevator pitch.
Absolutely.
This isn't what you need to do.
For the student who's thinking about using ChatGPT and in doing so, thinking about shortchanging themselves, how to explain to them that? Well, it gets to what you're saying, which is what is the purpose of the assignment, but what is the purpose of education? And the purpose of education is to train your mind. If you think by analogy, if you wanted to train your muscles to become very strong, you would go to the gym and lift weights. Now, you could cheat yourself by going to the gym and having a machine help you lift the weights, but then your muscles won't become strong. And so if you want your mind to become well-developed and strong and able to reason and able to think sharply and come up with creative and unique ideas, then you need to focus on training your mind. And that's the purpose of education. And if you go and start using ChatGPT to do your thinking for you, you're not going to train your mind. You're going to have a weak mind, and you're going to be unable to succeed in the world.
Joe stole everything I was going to say. I've used that exact example before with students about going to the gym, because they don't think that's impractical, but they think all the things we do are impractical. But I will say that, and this is something I've been saying to students for as long as I've been teaching, which is that you have to live with this for your whole life, and you want it to be an interesting place. Like, you are going to be here, the resident of this brain, for all the days you have, and if you want to have interesting thoughts, interesting things to think about, then you need to put interesting things into it and do interesting things with it. And I don't think, like you said, shortchange is the word. I think AI shortchanges that.
Well, I have one last question, and it begins with a rather long passage from The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. It's a book written just after World War II, wherein C.S. Lewis is addressing contemporary problems in education. They had removed beauty from the curriculum, and it was a subtle way, removing beauty, to also remove like objective truth. And it's a really seminal essay in our field as classical educators. The Abolition of Man, they have it as a series of lectures on YouTube. If you're not familiar with it, it's really, really great. But at the very end of the essay, C.S. Lewis talks about all of these changes that have taken place as a result of this pretty relentless pursuit of the conquest of nature, of subduing more and more of like the natural world under man's control, and ultimately subjecting human beings to that level of control too. So the way that, we can kind of remake the landscape around us to suit our needs. I mean, even the very air in this room is conditioned to the point where it's possible to be in a suit in North Carolina in the late spring. We've exercised such profound control over nature. We can pretty much do whatever we want at this point. We've got to steward it, got to be very careful, take care of the world that God has entrusted to us. But C.S. Lewis is building from that, how dangerous it gets when we start exerting that level of control over other human beings, over people. The end of the Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis says thus: "Man's conquest of nature, if the dreams of some scientific planners are realized, means the rule of a few hundred men over billions upon billions of men. For there is neither a simple increase of power on man's side. Each new power won by man is a power over man as well. Each advance leaves him weaker as well as stronger. In every victory, besides being the general who triumphs, he is also the prisoner who follows the triumphal car. I'm not yet considering whether the total results of such ambivalent victories is a good thing or bad. I am only making clear what man's conquest of nature really means, and especially that final stage in the conquest, which perhaps is not far off." I bring up this quote because I'd always thought that the idea of the mind is something different from the body, from nature. The mind, which we could equate with human intelligence, was separate from this ongoing conquest over nature, because the mind is itself a separate substance, a different kind of substance from that of the body and the natural world. But as we talk about ChatGPT and the way that it operates, that it mimics human intelligence, and that it's got this ability to perhaps like bend its users to its answers and get students to not think for themselves, but instead rely on the answers that it gets from their computers or their phones. Is human intelligence here the last bastion of human nature to be conquered by some unscrupulous men and the machines that we think perhaps wrongly are going to liberate us? And I know this is a pretty tall question, but is the mind, human intelligence, just the last unconquered space of human nature?
I think in this context, you could argue, yes, I was an immediate thought to that, but only if we shortchange ourselves, right? Only if we don't allow ourselves to develop the habits and the skills and the thoughts that we're thinking. Because if we don't, then to quote from earlier, I think AI could surpass that man, right? That AI could conquer that person. But what I think what we're seeing as all this develops is that the great fear that AI is going to become self-aware and rise up and conquer human beings, that seems to be a fantasy, right? It's not going to be Skynet from the Terminator movies. That doesn't seem possible because of all the limitations that we've seen on it. What I do see happening, another sci-fi reference, is that AI is becoming more like the old ship's computer from the Star Trek series, where it performs functions for us, it processes things for us, but it doesn't. There's no threat, or there's no surpassing. And of course, the great hero of those, Jean-Luc Picard, is a man of letters and a man of education and erudite, and there's no way that the ship's computer will surpass him, right? So that to me gives comfort. That's the kind of person, the kind of future that we could have with AI in some form. But I think it's dependent on us to preserve that last bastion of human intelligence, to preserve that unique quality of what makes us human, that distinguishes us from the machine, and not give into it.
I agree with Lewis's premise, but I don't agree with his assertion that this final conquering of human intelligence may be something that's coming soon. I think that human ingenuity and the human spirit is inexhaustible and unconquerable.
That's really inspiring. I mean, I love that. That's like the human spirit is that, like, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield, which is the last lines from Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem Ulysses. This is the most wonderful explanation of grammar, but the verbals there, the infinitives, to strive, to seek, to find, it speaks to the infinite, potential of the human spirit. So, Chelsea?
I kind of along the lines of what Matt was saying, I was thinking a lot about Fahrenheit 451, a text that we just read in 12th grade. And if you haven't read it, I'm not going to summarize the whole book for you, but it is a book about use of technology. And there's a way that we can use technology to make us complacent and dull. And there's a way that we can use technology to our advantage. And everything, like we've touched on here, everything is technically a technology and was at some point a technology. And in the book, you see most of the city gets leveled by an atomic bomb at the end of the novel, but there are a group of elites, of scholars who decided they wanted the life of the mind, and they turned and lived in the woods, and they continue on. So no, they were not all conquered in the end. There's a group who were determined not to be, because they were using their human mind and their ability to reason, and they had memorized a lot of books, and they continued on. So I agree with Joe and Matt.
Yeah, and to bring it back to that original Phaedrus dialogue, like they had internalized these profound explanations of the problems of the human condition and solutions to them. They had internalized that. They had memorized like Ecclesiastes, they were putting around to different people and pointing out that he has memorized this book that really speaks to the problems that we're engaged in right now.
Yeah.
So at this point, we can open it up for Q&A. If there's anybody in the audience that has any questions, we can try to answer them. If not, we can always ask ChatGPT. Kidding. We could Google it. I think Googling is still okay. Any questions? Anything that maybe we didn't touch on? Mr. Milner?
I like what you said. I'm sorry, I forget your last name, Joe.
Joe Davison.
Yeah, Mr. Davis. I agree that you believe, and I kind of believe the same thing, that human intellect is extremely difficult to surpass. However, we have to continue training ourselves and teaching to use that intellect and to develop it, and not to ever stop doing it, and rely on other technologies to allow that to happen. That would be my comment to add to yours. But thank you.
Thank you.
And just for the recording, just reiterating how important it is to continue to develop your mind, to develop your mental abilities. I mean, that's one reason why I love Latin so much, and memorizing Latin grammar and paradigms, which is not very fun, but it keeps my mind flexible. Even now I still do it. But just anything that we can do to keep our minds sharp, despite the fact that, we're not in school anymore. Joe, do you want to respond to that?
To what?
Well, to Mr. Milner's comment, just about how important it is to keep learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that's. Thank you for saying that.
Any other questions? Anything like that? Yes, ma'am?
Well, yeah, I guess it's for Joe. I want to know, right now I feel like it's probably pretty easy for you to find that. I think everything written is probably sounds like a bad marketing brochure. But as it gets more sophisticated, but it still doesn't know grammar and syntax and just take the English lexicon and build proper sentences, or in my mind it's more like a Mad Libs. It's just popping in other sentences and copying them and spitting out. That's why it's so easy to detect, especially in Chelsea class, because it's not going to have emotion like Christina Rossetti or sarcasm or wit or drop punctuation like Cummings. So you'll be able to find that all the time. So is it true it's not creative, right?
It's not creative, and at least these large language models, the way they work, they don't understand the rules of grammar. It's not like they're taught the rules of grammar, or they're taught, the way that humans are taught. It's entirely a statistical, probabilistic, mathematical model. And so, it's remarkable to the degree that it does mimic human language and human expression, but at the end of the day, it is not a human expression.
So anything like sarcasm or even a metaphor or comparing
it can simulate that. It can get close to that, but I think it's something fundamentally different. It's just copying. You can show it examples of sarcasm, show it 100 examples, and it may come up with something kind of like that, but it's not going to have the same essence.
Okay. And then for all the teachers, will the students now have another level of challenge to prove their paper was written by AI? Do they have to put in mistakes? I mean, how far are we going to get?
Blue books.
Yeah.
You know, the simple thing is that it's easy to not fall prey to using it by going through the process yourself. But I think the thing we have to educate them on is that if in any way their writing is being exposed to the internet, for lack of a better term, if it's put online in any form for whatever purpose or for whatever reason, then it's no longer their property. Anything can happen to it, and they run a risk. And so if we can go, in a sense, go back to just the old-fashioned method. And we've even discussed, should we just be having students write things by hand on paper again? Yeah. Then the simple things like that will prevent it from ever being an issue. Of course, the problem is the temptation, especially with how integrated everything is these days.
I like the blue books idea, especially because writing longhand does stimulate different parts of the brain, and so it's easier to internalize information that you're copying down for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to think about is changing the way that we evaluate students and what we're asking students to do. So I think about things like oral examinations or other mechanisms for arriving at a conclusion of what that student's level of understanding is other than writing. Maybe that we need new methods as well.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up an interesting point about the mind and the nature of the mind, and I think it's attached to our emotions. And do you think that because we have those emotions and we have that nature of the mind, which is separate from our mechanical body, that's why it'll be like Star Trek and not like the Terminator? Do you think that's kind of where the separation will come from?
Well, and the question, just for the recording, the nature of the mind and the body, in fact, it largely begins with Descartes, the separation of the mind from the body. He has this thought experiment that if I can envision my body existing separately from my mind, so kind of like in dreams and things like that, he can have a dream that he's sitting by the fireplace and reading a book, but he happens to be in bed and dreaming. So it's kind of hard to tell the difference between like reality as we see it. Our senses can deceive us sometimes. I think with the anecdote, maybe drawing from C.S. Lewis, is the fear, not necessarily that AI is going to overtake us, but that it will be much more easily led astray by answers that we get from artificial intelligence empowered chatbots, because we haven't developed our mental faculties to the extent that we can tell when we're being lied to anymore. Descartes, that he's a 17th century French philosopher, identifies like common sense and reason and logic as the ability to tell truth from falsehood. And I think if a student is continually like leaning on some outside source to tell them what to think, then they're not going to be able to distinguish truth from falsehood, from facts from error and things like that. So to me, it speaks the dangers in not teaching students how to think and how to distinguish truth from error. So
a thought I had when you said that is that if by mind and intelligence we're thinking abstractly and by body we're thinking grounded in reality, I think that's at the essence of the limitation of AI and why it won't become the thing that we have been warned it might become, because it lacks the grounding in reality, which I think we've said in a number of different ways, or experience might be another way of saying that.
And maybe a way of thinking about it too, like the machines probably won't get better, but we could definitely get worse.
Yeah, that's true.
If we're not careful.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yes, ma'am?
Yes. Well, maybe one of the problems that I can see is how the artificial intelligence is presented or portrayed for everybody, right? But the target is our students. It's like a substitute tool instead of a tool for. Instead of this is a tool for you to, because they're going to use a label to make label, like for this label. So how to use it. They have to learn how to do things, how to present it, how they have to be done, the proper grammar, the proper way to present everything. And then later on, they have verbalize. A week ago, I have a meeting with a lawyer, and she has to write a letter, and she was typing, like this, she kind of fast and whatever, and try to organize her paragraphs and stuff. And suddenly, she was like clicking here and there, and it was, like, yes. And then check again and read it and fix it manually, and then go again. So I know technology is here, everybody's using it. So just because she did it on Heat when we were at a Zoom meeting, but otherwise I will never know if she really write the document or the artificial intelligence did it, right? So it is amazing what the technology can do for us. I guess we have to really insist on our children that it's a tool, it's not substituting, and then you have to also be able to check after, and in order to be able to check after, so you have to learn first, and your brain has to be ready to manage those tools, not the other way around.
I really appreciate that comment, because that story of, AI is transforming like the legal profession in that way to aid in productivity. It's a tool. We have to learn how to use the tool efficiently, but I don't feel it's appropriate to give the tool to students in junior high and in high school, right? Or in law school for that matter, because you want the person who is representing your interests to be of the highest possible mental abilities possible. It's one thing to write out a letter, but you want that individual to know their stuff inside and out so that they can help you. Junior high, high school, like that's when students are being trained to use those sorts of tools. It's the same thing with a car. A car would help students get around certainly a lot faster, but even 16 is probably not wise to let them start driving and so forth. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and it's going to be a big wake-up call for me once they get behind a wheel.
Get ready.
Anyway, yeah. Do you guys want to answer that? Just about the need to develop your mental faculties to the highest ability possible, and then you can use a tool that perhaps may clone you for all intents and purposes, right? Make you more productive, help you to produce more.
I don't know what to say beyond I agree. I think that's a very nice way of putting it too, that it's not a substitute.
Yeah, the problem is that it's happening. We probably don't agree with it, but unfortunately it is.
I think a legal contract and a poem are two very different things, though, right? So, it's great. I think it's great that a lawyer would use it for, assuming they have the background in law and all of that foundation. If they're using it as a daily tool to help review contracts or put together things and make themselves productive, that's great. But again, that lawyer is not in his productive capacity there. He's not trying to learn. He's not in a educational environment where he's trying to better his mind and train his or her mind.
Yeah.
Whereas something like writing a poem or doing some kind of expression, this is more about training the human being, training the soul of that person.
And the legal contract is itself so formulaic, so you can tell the machine what elements of the formula it needs to put in there anyhow, versus understanding all the intricacies of a paper or developing an argument or something akin to that.
I like the tool analogy as well, because we are constantly trying to determine what will be taught with the precious resource of time that we have. We can't do everything. Neither is it appropriate for a high school age student to be exposed to everything. And so there are some tools that exist that you won't find on this campus because they don't fall within the scope. Scanning electron microscope. We don't teach students how to use that. It doesn't fall within the scope of what we're trying to teach here. And I think AI falls into that category. Yes, it's a tool that can be used, but it also just happens to not fall within the scope of purpose of what we're trying to do. So we're constantly making those choices, whether it's over what to teach or what to use to teach that, or what we have to teach our students to use. So with a clear sense of why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. it's easy for us to say AI doesn't suit our purposes.
Yes, Connor?
I'd like to say that I agree with the idea of how you can't use AI to substitute a product or even as a baseline and build off of that. I believe that's wrong. I do think that the idea of using it as a tool should be looked more into in the field because, I really like the gym analogy that was given earlier about how when a machine is used, it's not actually building muscle. But I think that especially when you go into the field of, or when you look into people with learning disabilities, there is a sense where you see machines such as assisted dips in the gym where they help you with your body weight, and in turn make it a little bit easier so that you can work in increments towards a higher goal. If you are bearing too much weight, there's going to be a point where you can't make any progress because the stone you carry is too heavy.
It's a good reminder, and I definitely think we have to think about those things as a school. But I guess I don't have a strong response other than to just repeat what I said. That we also have to know what we are doing and what we how we choose to serve our students and what's best for them here. And we actually we don't do everything. But I do know this: there are other schools with different purposes, with different setups and different processes that make different choices. So that exists. There is a school out there that's going to teach high school students how to use AI because it fits within what they're trying to do. It's just not this school, if I could say it like that.
And I think operating within the spirit behind the rule itself isn't there that ChatGPT is totally bad, you shouldn't use it under any circumstances, and so forth. I mean, I would recommend that students here, junior high, high school, not use it for that purpose that they really want to flex and develop their writing abilities and their research abilities. But the spirit behind the rule is just like trying to help that student that particular way. I mean, maybe there would be circumstances in which it would be beneficial in some instance. I feel like I would have to know more about what the scenario is and things like that. But it's just a good reminder to try to treat people as individuals, people made in God's image, and that's where our value and our dignity comes from. And as a result, there just may be a way that we can better help that individual. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to come down and say that ChatGPT is the way to go about it. I feel like with those sorts of instances, you would want to treat people as individuals and go from there. Uh-huh. Joe, Chelsea,
yeah,
you guys
I would
want to weigh
agree.
in there?
I would agree. I mean, it comes back to this question of understanding the student and the teacher needing to understand the student. What you mentioned, you gave an example of using a tool, but what's common, whether you're using a tool or not, there needs to be this resistance. There needs to be the student coming up against resistance. And so could you use a tool in a hypothetical situation like you brought up, and the student would still be encountering enough resistance to learn something? Maybe, but there may be other ways without the tool as well to provide a similar kind of resistance. Like maybe instead of a 10-page paper, if a student is struggling, it's a 2-page paper, but they do it themselves. You know what I mean? So there are other ways without necessarily having to rely on AI or a tool like that to provide, for a specific student.
It's a more compassionate answer than I gave, but I agree with it.
I think that's the key, that the last line, not letting the technology manage them. Continuing with the gym analogy, to me, sometimes ChatGPT doesn't help the student, doesn't assist them and push them a little bit further than where they need to go, which is really the job of the teacher, by the way, to figure out how a student can improve and give targeted feedback towards that end. But ChatGPT is a lot like putting entirely too much weight on the bar and trying to do squats or bench presses with 3 or 4 times the amount of weight that I can actually do. And so I don't actually get stronger, but I actually get crushed. ChatGPT, if I give it a query, it's not going to give me a rephrased question to lead me to the right answer. It's just going to give me the right answer and perhaps tons of information to support that. And that way the machine really smothers my ability to learn. Like, it gives me the right answer, and that's when I stop, and I stop thinking through and reasoning through it. I feel like that's the way to try to look at this particular tool here, and that it's something that's capable of doing all of the work for you, and in that way you're not going to get any better.
Well said.
Do you guys any last thoughts that you guys want to have? It's just as far as time, I should probably close this down. Well, thank you to everyone who is gathered here in attendance at Thales Academy Rollsville for this panel on artificial intelligence, yet another hurdle for students and educators. Thank you to everybody who's watching this recording at home. If you're interested in learning more about really the benefits of a classical education and how it speaks to contemporary issues like this and helps students develop their full mental faculties, their ability to research and write and speak and debate, please check us out at our website at www.thalesacademy.org. For Thales Press, I'm Winston Brady, joined here by a panel of friends and colleagues to discuss this important topic, and I really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.